Zilkor had been in the weapons trade for decades, dealing in everything from planet-killer bombs to genetically modified war beasts. He had supplied warlords, tyrants, and entire empires with destruction beyond measure. But never in his long career had he been this confused. He stood in his private docking bay, his reptilian eyes narrowing at the large shipping container in front of him. It had just arrived from an undisclosed human colony, one he hadn't even known existed. The client had paid an obscene amount of credits for a weapon that would, in their words, change the course of war itself. Zilkor had expected an experimental superweapon, maybe something that could obliterate fleets in a single shot. Instead, all he had received was a single, unconscious human. His clawed fingers tapped against his datapad as he double-checked the manifest. There was no mistake. The cargo he had been paid to transport was not an arsenal of weapons, not a war drone, not even a bioengineered killing machine. It was just this one human. He gritted his teeth, frustration boiling inside him. Either this was some elaborate joke, or the client had gone insane. He activated his comm unit, his voice sharp with irritation. "You told me to deliver the deadliest weapon in the galaxy. This is a human." The voice on the other end was calm, almost amused. "Yes." Zilkor's tail twitched. "Is this some kind of scam?" The voice chuckled. "Watch and learn." The line went dead. Zilkor let out a low growl, but knew better than to refuse a paying customer. With a sigh, he tapped a command into the control panel. The container hissed open, releasing a cloud of cold mist as its occupants stirred. The human male, broad-shouldered, dressed in what looked like standard military fatigues, blinked a few times before rolling his neck with a sharp crack. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Zilkor. "Where's the battlefield?" The human asked casually, as if waking up from a nap. Zilkor frowned. "You're the battlefield?" A smirk crossed the human's face. Figures. Before Zilkor could ask any more questions, a loud horn echoed through the docking bay. The warlord's fleet had arrived. The battle was about to begin. The warlord, a massive insectoid creature named Rax-Vek, stood atop his hovering command platform, his mandibles clicking in amusement. His forces numbered in the thousands, heavily armored warriors wielding plasma cannons and energy blades, combat drones hovering overhead, artillery units locked and loaded. On the other side, the enemy forces stood in equal numbers, prepared for war. The battlefield was a wasteland of jagged rocks and craters, the ground scorched from previous conflicts. In the middle of it all stood the human, completely unarmed. Rax-Vek turned to Zilkor, his mandibles twitching. "You dare insult me by bringing a single unarmed human to this war?" Zilkor had no answer. He had no idea what was about to happen. The human cracked his knuckles. "Let's get this over with." The warlord snarled and raised a claw. "Kill him!" The battlefield erupted. Plasma bolts screamed through the air. Energy blades hummed as warriors charged, drones locked onto their single target. But the human was already moving. Zilkor's eyes widened as he witnessed something impossible. Rourke, as the human had introduced himself, was dodging gunfire with precision that no organic being should have. His movements were too fast, too calculated. He weaved through energy blasts, ducking and rolling before launching himself at the nearest enemy. In an instant, Rourke disarmed the warrior, grabbing the plasma rifle and snapping the alien's arm in one brutal motion. He spun, firing into the ranks with pinpoint accuracy. Every shot hit a weak point. Helmets shattered, armor cracked. Warriors collapsed before they even knew what was happening. The drones adjusted, recalibrating their aim, but Rourke was already airborne, using a fallen enemy as a springboard to leap toward them. Mid-air, he twisted, grabbed one of the hovering machines, and slammed it into the ground with a force that sent a shockwave through the battlefield. Panic spread through the enemy ranks. This wasn't just a skilled soldier. This was something else entirely. He fought like a storm, adapting, improvising, and striking with terrifying efficiency. Zilkor had seen many warriors in his time, but none had ever fought like this. No hesitation. No wasted movements. Every attack was calculated, every dodge precise. The warlord's forces broke. What had begun as a show of dominance had turned into a massacre. Soldiers abandoned their weapons and ran. The warlord himself stepped back, his confidence replaced with something rare: fear. Rourke finally stopped, standing amidst the broken battlefield. He hadn't even broken a sweat. He looked at the warlord and smirked. "I think that's enough." The warlord, still in shock, slowly lowered his weapons. "What? What are you?" Rourke tilted his head. "Just human." Zilkor felt his stomach twist. He had spent his life dealing in weapons of mass destruction, selling death to the highest bidder. But now, watching this single human wipe out an army without effort, he realized something horrifying: humans weren't just another species. They weren't just another player in the galactic wars. They were the war. The warlord turned to Zilkor, his voice unsteady. You must get me more of them." Zilkor swallowed hard. "That might be a problem." The warlord's eyes narrowed. "Why?" Rourke chuckled, slinging a captured rifle over his shoulder. "Because we don't fight for just anyone." Zilkor watched as the warlord's confidence crumbled. The realization had set in. No empire, no fleet, no amount of technology could match what a single, well-trained human could do. The balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted, and for the first time, Zilkor wondered if he had been dealing in the wrong kind of weapons all along. As Rourke walked past him, he clapped Zilkor on the shoulder. "Don't look so shocked. You just made the best deal of your life." Zilkor stood in the observation chamber of the warlord's ship, his claws drumming anxiously against the metal railing. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the battlefield displayed on the enormous viewport before him. Thousands of heavily armored warriors stood ready, energy weapons humming with lethal intent, combat drones hovering in perfect formation. Artillery cannons lined the ridges of the rocky wasteland below, their barrels glowing with charged plasma. It was a force capable of leveling entire cities, a force meant to win wars in mere hours. And yet, Zilkor's focus was not on the army, nor the warlord who stood beside him, mandibles twitching with anticipation. His eyes were locked onto a single figure standing alone at the center of it all, a human, unarmed, unmoving, and completely outnumbered. This was madness. Zilkor had spent years dealing in weapons of unimaginable destruction, selling entire arsenals to the highest bidders. When he had received the request for the deadliest weapon in the galaxy, he had expected to deliver an experimental war machine, a superweapon, something with the power to shatter fleets. Instead, he had been handed a human. He hadn't believed it at first, had nearly refused to make the delivery, but the client had insisted. And now, here they were, standing on the precipice of battle, waiting to see if the human was truly what they had claimed. The warlord's voice cut through the silence. "This is a joke, arms dealer. One soldier against an entire army?" His mandibles clicked with irritation as he glared at Zilkor. "You insult me." Zilkor swallowed hard. "I was given assurances," he said, though even he wasn't sure he believed them. Down below, the human commander Rourke, as he had introduced himself, rolled his shoulders and cracked his neck. His stance was casual, almost lazy, but there was something in the way he moved that unsettled Zilkor. He was too calm, too still. The warlord raised a claw, signaling to his troops. "Kill him!" The battlefield erupted. Plasma bolts screamed through the air, energy swords crackled to life, and the ground trembled as warriors charged. Drones locked onto their target, artillery cannons fired their first devastating rounds, and an overwhelming wave of destruction surged toward the lone human. And then, impossibly, the human moved. One moment, he was standing still. The next, he was a blur. He ducked beneath a plasma bolt, sidestepped an incoming blade, and twisted his body with impossible precision. His movements were fluid, calculated, faster than anything Zilkor had ever seen. A warrior lunged at him, but before the alien could strike, Rourke's hand shot out, grabbing the soldier by the wrist and twisting with a sharp, brutal motion. The alien's arm snapped with a sickening crack, and in the same instant, Rourke ripped the plasma rifle from his grasp and fired a single shot into the warrior's chest. There was no hesitation, no wasted movement. Rourke pivoted, firing with pinpoint accuracy, each shot striking vital points. Warriors collapsed one after another, their bodies hitting the ground before their comrades even realized what was happening. A drone swooped down, its energy weapons locking onto him, but Rourke leapt into the air, catching the machine mid-flight and slamming it into the ground with bone-crushing force. He grabbed its fallen weapon, spun on his heel, and unloaded a barrage of plasma fire into the advancing forces. Zilkor's jaw went slack. This wasn't a battle. This was a massacre. The warlord beside him let out a low growl. "Impossible," he muttered, his claws tightening around the hilt of his ceremonial blade. No creature moves like that. And yet, Rourke did. He was relentless, an unstoppable force of destruction. He fought with the efficiency of a machine, the instinct of a predator, and the brutality of a storm. He adapted with every passing second, using fallen weapons, dodging fire with inhuman reflexes, dismantling his enemies as though he had done this 1,000 times before. The battlefield, once a place of order and strategy, had turned into chaos. The warlord's army, once confident in their overwhelming numbers, had begun to falter. Panic spread through the ranks. Soldiers hesitated, their shots becoming frantic, their formations breaking apart. Some turned to flee, but Rourke was faster. He weaved through them like a phantom, striking with ruthless precision, cutting down any who dared stand against him. The artillery cannons roared, sending explosive rounds toward him, but he was already moving, already calculating. He grabbed a fallen enemy's energy shield, activating it just in time to deflect the blast. The explosion sent dust and debris into the air, obscuring him from sight. For a moment, there was silence. Then, from within the smoke, figures began to drop. One by one, warriors collapsed, taken down before they could even see their attacker. Zilkor's hands were trembling. He had seen wars. He had witnessed planetary bombardments, the devastation of entire civilizations. But this was different. This was something primal, something terrifying. He glanced at the warlord, whose mandibles were now pressed tightly together. The once mighty ruler of countless battlefields was silent, his confidence replaced with something rare fear. Then it was over. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of the fallen. The once proud army lay in ruins, their weapons abandoned, their ranks decimated. And in the center of it all stood Rourke, completely unscathed. He let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off a light workout. Then he turned, his piercing blue eyes locking onto the warlord. He smirked. "Not bad," he said casually. The warlord took an involuntary step back. He had lost wars before, had suffered defeats, but never like this. Never against one. Rourke strode toward him, stepping over fallen warriors as if they were nothing more than obstacles in his path. When he finally stopped, standing just feet away from the trembling warlord, he crossed his arms. "So," he said, his voice calm, "you wanted a weapon?" He gestured to the battlefield behind him. "There it is." Zilkor swallowed hard. He had spent his life trading in weapons, selling devastation to the highest bidder. But now, looking at the human before him, he realized something horrifying. Humans were not just another species. They were not just soldiers. They were the war itself. The warlord, still frozen in place, barely managed to speak. "What? What do you want?" Rourke smirked again. "Simple." He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to make the warlord shiver. "Tell your people. Tell everyone." His eyes gleamed with something dark, something ancient. Humanity isn't to be underestimated. And with that, he walked away, leaving behind only silence. A heavy silence hung over the command center. The officers looked to Korak for orders, but for the first time in his long military career, he had none to give. His forces outnumbered this lone warrior 1,000,000 to 1, and yet he was tearing through them like a force of nature. A sharp beep pulled him from his thoughts. Another incoming transmission this time, from his ground commander. He answered immediately, the screen flickering to reveal the panicked, bloodied face of an officer. "General, we can't stop him. He's not human. We hit him, but he keeps coming." The signal cut off with a sickening crunch, followed by static. Korak's mandibles tightened. This was impossible. No species was this resilient, this deadly. He had fought against countless warrior races, cybernetic war machines, bioengineered super soldiers, hive-minded swarm creatures. None had ever instilled fear in him. But this was different. A deep metallic clang echoed through the ship, snapping everyone to attention. The sound came again closer this time. Heavy, deliberate footsteps rang through the halls, growing louder with each passing second. Korak turned toward the viewport, his heart pounding. His forces were still planet-side. No one had boarded the ship. No one should have been on the ship. And yet, the footsteps continued. A security officer scrambled for the intercom, his voice shaking. "All units, intruder alert." His words were cut off by a single gunshot. The officer collapsed, a smoking hole between his eyes. Korak spun around, his claws reaching for his sidearm. The command center doors slid open with a hiss, and there he was. The human. The warrior stepped into the room with the same unnerving calmness he had displayed on the battlefield. His armor was splattered with Accelarian blood, his rifle still smoking from the shot. He didn't speak, didn't shout, didn't make demands. He simply stared. For the first time in his life, General Korak felt true fear. The officers raised their weapons, but the human moved first. He dove forward, his rifle barking as he fired with pinpoint accuracy. Korak barely had time to duck as his men fell around him, their bodies crumpling like discarded rag dolls. Desperation took hold. Korak lunged for the emergency override, his claws slamming against the console. The ship's automated defenses roared to life, turrets descending from the ceiling, targeting the intruder. But it didn't matter. The human was already upon them. The next few moments were a blur of gunfire, screams, and chaos. Korak tried to fight, tried to flee, but there was no escape. One by one, his officers fell until only he remained. A cold barrel pressed against his forehead. Breathing heavily, Korak looked up, his mandibles trembling. The human stood over him, his expression unreadable behind the visor. He didn't speak. He didn't gloat. He simply pulled the trigger. And just like that, the Accelarian Dominion's greatest warlord was no more. The war was over before it had even begun. The human turned, stepping over the bodies as he made his way back to the command console. With practiced ease, he accessed the ship's controls, broadcasting a single message across the Dominion's fleet. "This world is under my protection." And with that, he vanished into the darkness once more. Because he wasn't just a soldier. He was a one-man apocalypse. The auction hall was filled with the most dangerous beings in the galaxy: warlords, mercenaries, crime bosses, and collectors of destruction. They had come from across the stars, each seeking the deadliest weapon ever created. The air was thick with tension, anticipation crackling like an exposed power conduit. At the center of the grand chamber, standing atop a raised platform, was a massive containment crate covered in layers of energy shielding. A towering Graxian arms dealer, his deep crimson scales glinting under the lights, stepped forward with a smug expression. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice echoing across the hall, "you have come seeking power, and today you will witness history. This is not just another weapon. It is the weapon." His clawed hand gestured toward the crate, and with a deep hum, the shields deactivated one by one. The crowd leaned forward in eager anticipation, their eyes reflecting the pulsating lights of advanced containment fields. The Graxian grinned, savoring the moment. "I present to you the ultimate force of destruction." The final locks disengaged, steam hissing from the opening crate. But when the doors finally slid apart, revealing the weapon inside, a murmur of confusion spread through the room. There was no colossal war machine, no superweapon capable of planetary annihilation, no doomsday device humming with uncontrollable energy. Instead, standing within the containment chamber, bound by simple restraints, was a human. A single human. The room fell into stunned silence. Then, someone scoffed. A reptilian warlord from the farthest reaches of the Vordan Empire sneered, his forked tongue flicking out in irritation. "Is this some kind of joke?" he growled. "You promised us a weapon, not a weak, fleshy creature." The Graxian's smirk never wavered. "You do not yet understand," he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "This is not a weapon. This is the weapon. The deadliest force this galaxy has ever known." Laughter erupted from the crowd. A towering, insectoid warrior chittered mockingly, tapping its armored exoskeleton. "You expect us to believe that this soft-skinned creature is deadlier than our warships? Than our planet crackers? I have seen humans before. They are fragile. They bleed easily. They break." The Graxian's yellow eyes gleamed with something almost like pity. "Oh, you think you have seen humans. You have seen them in chains, in laboratories, on the losing side of wars. But you have never seen them unleashed." The restraints clicked open. The human stretched his arms, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off stiffness. He was unremarkable in appearance, average height, lean but not overly muscular, dressed in a simple combat suit worn at the edges. His gaze, however, was sharp, assessing the room with an almost unnatural calm. He did not speak. He simply observed. The insectoid warrior scoffed, stepping forward. "Let's see how dangerous he really is." Without warning, he lashed out with a bladed limb, moving at speeds faster than most species could track. The blade should have torn through the human's flesh in an instant. But it didn't. The moment the attack came, the human moved. He didn't dodge. He redirected. His hand snapped up, catching the insectoid strike with a precision that defied logic. With a twist of his wrist, he used the alien's own momentum against it, sending the warrior crashing to the floor in a heap of chitin and confusion. The hall erupted into chaos. The warlords and mercenaries, insulted by the display, surged forward as one. Some drew energy weapons, others unsheathed their blades, all eager to prove the absurdity of the Graxian's claim. But the human had already calculated their movements. The moment the first shot was fired, he was gone, a blur of movement that defied physics. He appeared behind the nearest attacker, seizing a weapon from its holster and firing a single, precise shot into another's knee. Before the injured alien even hit the ground, the human had already moved again, disarming another combatant with a fluid twist, turning their own weapon against them. The battle was over before it began. In a matter of seconds, the humans stood alone amid a sea of fallen warlords, their bodies groaning in pain, weapons scattered across the floor. He hadn't killed a single one. He hadn't needed to. The Graxian arms dealer stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. His grin had only widened. "Now do you understand?" he asked, his voice almost reverent. "This is what makes humans dangerous. It is not their weapons. It is them. Their unpredictability, their adaptability, their refusal to accept defeat. You see them as weak, but that is where you fail. They are weak until they are not. They are harmless until you give them a reason not to be. And by then, it is too late." The fallen warlord struggled to rise, but the human merely turned and retrieved a small device from his belt. He pressed a button, and the entire room locked down their own security systems, now under his control. The gathered mercenaries, warlords, and crime lords had come to buy a weapon. Instead, they had just been bested by one. The human finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. "Weapons are tools. They rust. They break. They become obsolete." He stepped forward, placing a boot on the chest of the insectoid warrior who had first attacked him. The alien froze, not daring to move. The human leaned down slightly, his expression unreadable. But a mind? A mind that refuses to surrender, that learns, that adapts, that is a weapon you can never disarm. He straightened and glanced at the Graxian. "Our deal is complete." The arms dealer chuckled, tapping his control pad. The doors unlocked, and a ship's coordinates appeared on a nearby screen. The human gave him a slight nod before walking toward the exit. As he reached the threshold, he paused, turning his head just enough for the gathered warlords to hear his final words. Next time, don't buy a weapon you can't control." And with that, he was gone. The silence in the auction hall was deafening. No one spoke. No one moved, even those who had considered themselves the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Vast network of power and control that stretched across the known universe. But today, the chamber of the High Council was silent. The once proud representatives of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy sat frozen, staring at the massive display screen that covered the chamber's far wall. It was not the image itself that filled them with dread, it was the message it carried. A single figure stood against the backdrop of a ruined warship, the wreckage of a fleet drifting in the void behind him. His uniform was torn, his face bloodied, but his stance was unwavering. "A human. You thought we were weak," his voice rang out, calm and cold. "You thought we would kneel. You were wrong." The transmission ended, but the silence remained. No one spoke. No one dared to. The war had begun as a mere skirmish, an effort to remind humanity of its place in the galactic order. The Council had seen their kind before, young, reckless civilizations that reached for the stars without understanding the weight of their actions. Such species needed to be guided, controlled. When humans refused to accept the Council's authority, the decision had been made. A swift, decisive strike would cripple their defenses, forcing them into submission. That strike never came. Instead, the galaxy had watched in horror as human warships, outnumbered and outgunned, refused to fall. Their fleets did not crumble, they adapted. Their soldiers did not retreat, they learned. Every battle that should have ended their resistance only made them stronger. The Council's armadas, built over centuries, were torn apart in weeks. Entire planetary garrisons vanished without a trace. And now, in the aftermath of their greatest defeat, the truth could no longer be denied. The humans were winning. A Kelran warlord, his armored hide glistening with sweat, finally found his voice. They should not be this strong. They lack the numbers, the resources. They lack fear, interrupted a Axelari strategist, her many eyes reflecting the flickering lights of the chamber. That is what we failed to understand. We believed fear was the greatest weapon, the force that controlled the galaxy. But humans, they are different. They do not break under pressure. They grow. A ripple of unease spread through the Council. The idea was almost unthinkable. Every species had limits. Every civilization had a breaking point. But humanity did not follow the rules. They defied logic, adapting at speeds that should have been impossible. They learned from their enemies, not just their technology, but their tactics, their weaknesses, their very way of thinking. The Council had seen warriors before, but never like this. Humanity did not just fight. They evolved. A transmission request blinked on the central console. Every eye in the chamber turned to the Supreme Chancellor, an ancient being whose species had ruled since the dawn of the Council. His voice, once steady and commanding, now held the faintest tremor. "Open the channel." The display flickered to life, revealing a human commander standing on the bridge of a warship. Unlike the desperate, battle-worn figure from the earlier transmission, this man stood with calm confidence, his uniform immaculate, his expression unreadable. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. The Council knew who he was, the architect of their downfall, the one whose name had become a whispered warning across the stars. "The war is over," he said simply. "You know it. We know it." The Chancellor's mandibles clicked together. "You expect us to surrender?" The human's gaze did not waver. "I expect you to listen. You started this war because you thought we were beneath you. Because you believed we would kneel, that we would break. But we are still here. Your fleets are gone. Your armies shattered. Your control over the galaxy has crumbled." He stepped closer to the screen, his voice lowering just enough to send a chill through the room. "The galaxy has changed. And you have a choice. Accept that change or be erased by it." A deep silence filled the chamber. The Council had never known fear, not like this. They had ruled through strength, through the certainty that no power could challenge them. But now, Staring into the eyes of the species they had sought to crush, they saw something far worse than anger. They saw certainty. The Chancellor exhaled slowly, his mind calculating the only logical course left. "What are your terms?" The human's expression did not change. No more subjugation. No more enforced rule. Every species will stand on its own, free to govern itself. The Council will no longer dictate the fate of this galaxy. Murmurs of dissent rippled through the chamber, but none dared voice their opposition outright. The Council's rule had been absolute for centuries. Now, in a single generation, it was undone. But the true weight of their defeat came with the humans' final words. "We are not